So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. I want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Public Library for sponsoring. And let me get right to it now and introduce our guest speaker. So today's talk is the history of Tewksbury Township, New Jersey. Did you know that there are 5 other Tewksbury communities in the world? And we're going to try to spotlight all of them over the coming months. So we're going to, this afternoon specifically, we're going to learn about the history and origins of Tewksbury Township, New Jersey. We're going to enjoy a pictorial history of how Tewksbury was founded, some key people and places, and what life was like then and now. And this is presented by Shaun C. Van Doren, who has been the president of the Tewksbury, New Jersey Historical Society for the past 9 years. And Shaun is the official historian of Tewksbury Township and is an 8th generation resident of Tewksbury. So all of us watching live on Zoom and Facebook, and those that are going to watch after the fact on YouTube, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Shaun for joining us here this afternoon. And Shaun, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Okay, Robert, thank you. Thank you to the Tewksbury Library and the Friends of the Tewksbury Library for having me today. I'm happy to join you. So I've got a presentation to go through. We all know, there are times when history can be a little dry. So hopefully this is not too dry for folks in terms of what I put together. But I've got some old photos inserted in here. This is a hobby of mine in terms of history. Our historical society and my role as historian and role volunteer. My day job, I work for Merck and Company, the pharmaceutical company, and have a bachelor's degree in chemistry. So usually people say, well, how did you get involved in history when you got a science background? And it was actually through my father and grandfather. As Robert said, I'm 8 generations here in Tewksbury, New Jersey. The first Van Doren arrived here that I have traced back to 1699 that we have in our family Bible. So it's just a very interesting subject. I enjoy genealogy and trying to trace people's roots and try to help residents here in Tewksbury, New Jersey, as well as we get requests from all over the country for genealogy and history. So let's jump right in. And so Tewksbury from the early days here was formed from 2 land purchases made from the Indians back in 1709 called the Society. This entire area was originally in Amwell Township, Burlington County. Burlington County is 2 counties to the south of us in Hunterdon County. And Hunterdon was then set off in 1714. Tewksbury was still a part of that Amwell Township, but now was part of what became Hunterdon County. And then in 1730, Lebanon Township, which is a township just to the north of us, was also set off from Amwell. So this society, or what was called the Society's Great Tract, was land that encompassed approximately 100,000 acres. Again, purchased from the Indians by Lewis Morris. He later became a governor of New Jersey. And he was an agent for what was called the West Jersey Society, which was a group of London investors at the time. And this West Jersey Society's Great Tract is a land west of a straight line between Potterstown and what was called 10 chains above the falls at Pottersville. Way back then, measurements were not in feet and inches; they were in chains and links. So that's why it says 10 chains above the falls. And then it reached all the way to the Delaware River. Potterstown Road, which is one of our oldest roads, lies on this society line, with Potterstown being the earliest hamlet in Tewksbury, and this is in the late 1720s. And Potterstown was originally called the Ratchaway by the German settlers who had built a church there. In 1748, it became known as Potterstown, possibly named for a man plying the potter's trade. And the wording of a 1749 deed to the Lutheran congregation, in which King Street is called the road that leadeth unto the potters. James Logan became the largest landowner on the south and east side of this line. He held what was called 100-year leases first, and then he began to sell land later. Land sold for $10 to $12 per acre in the mid to late 1700s. Then it rose to $100 per acre at the coming of the turnpike. The turnpike was a main roadway, albeit dirt, that coursed through Tewksbury on a north-south route, and it was a toll road. That a financial collapse after the War of 1812 saw those land values drop again to $12 per acre. Today, here in Tewksbury, we see land sell for $100,000 plus per acre. So Tewksbury was set off from Lebanon Township in 1755. The first minute in the Township Minute Book was from March 11th, 1755, which we have. As best that I could tell, the research that I did and a predecessor of mine as historian did, that our Tewksbury name was best known to originate from Tewksbury, England. Tewksbury, England, as you know, because you had the presentation, has an extra E in it. And the tie-in or the connection is the earliest settlers here were the English. The earliest settlement dates back to 1700, where Oldwick is now. That's the village that I live in, which is part of Tewksbury, an unincorporated part of the township. Ralph Smith, an Englishman, was the leader. He was the most important landowner, and hence he originally named the settlement after himself, called Smithfield. Smith had a church building that was erected, which he sold to the Lutheran Society in 1749. And he also sold lots opposite the church on the south side of what's known today as Church Street, and they were known as the 7 legacy lots. And his name appears in the managing committee of the Lamington Presbyterian Church. Back in 1749, Lamington is a small hamlet in an adjacent municipality called Bedminster in Somerset County, and some other English names that appear at that time: Johnson, Cole, Platt, Ireland, and Carlisle. In 1705, a number of German Reform people residing between two cities in Germany called Wolfenbüttel and Halberstadt, driven by persecution, fled first to New World in Rhenish Prussia and then to Holland. In 1707, they embarked for New York, but adverse winds carried them into the Delaware Bay. They were intent on having a home among the Dutch, so they set off from Philadelphia to New York, following the Old York Road. That road still exists today, which led them to Hunterdon County and to Tewksbury, where they settled. Their descendants were Pickle, Welsh, Apgar, Farley, Alpa, Philhauer, Mielik, Hoffman, and Reinhardt. I have on my mother's side both Apgars and Reinhardts as part of my genealogy. After 1749, what was then Smithfield became the principal village here in Tewksbury. In 1752, then Lutheran pastor John Albert Wigand petitioned the governor and his council for liberty to collect money to be used in, quote, building a free school for the High Dutch in and near Bethlehem. And it appears that Wigand attempted to name the village that I referred to before as Oldwick as Bethlehem, but it never took. In 1754, the name Germantown was used alternately with New Germantown is when it first appeared. And we have a 1755 map of New Germantown that shows both an English school and a German school. So back then, children were segregated by nationality, English and German. And one school was located behind the Lutheran Church, which actually sits directly across the street from my home. And the other was located actually on my property, as I said, being directly across from the church. So there are two thoughts as to how the name Germantown and New Germantown came to be. The first is being named for the nationality of the Lutherans, except that most of the earlier settlers here were not German. As I explained earlier, they were English. Or named after Germantown, Pennsylvania, but with the new added to distinguish itself. And since James Logan, who I referenced earlier, was the largest landowner around the entire village, and he had originally migrated here from Germantown, Pennsylvania. So this is an old photo back to the early 1700s. This is just showing what was then Main Street, and the buildings you're looking at exist today. The building on the left, a stone building, was the original Hendershot family house. And actually there was a woman that just appeared a couple of days ago. I was out front in my yard working and asked where it was. She had traveled here from Indiana, hoping to find it, and of course she did. And so, she was looking for her ancestors' home that was part of her ancestors' family. So, was happy to help her. So, again, horse and buggy days, and dirt roads. So, New Germantown to Oldwick. As many people I'm sure know, anti-German sentiment at the time of World War I brought about a name change. Several town meetings were held to decide upon a name. There were suggestions at the time. Barnettville, that was Dr. Oliver Barnett. I'll talk about him in a little bit. Millerville, the Miller family, and the Fisher family. Fisherville were two prominent families here. Peachville. The village was surrounded by peach orchards. We were an agricultural community, and actually on one part of Oldwick still are today, surrounded by peach and apple orchards. Pershington, after General Pershing, and Montdidier. I'm not sure where that one came into play. But the name Oldwick was suggested by a Miss Caroline Otis. Miss Otis was the school teacher back then, and that won overmost. And so to decipher Oldwick, Wick in the English language meant village. And since by this time, 1919, the village was already over 200 years old. So Oldwick became the new name in 1919. And again, this is just a woodcut of north view of New Germantown, the main road leading into town. So we began to grow in Tewksbury during the mid-1700s. Other parts of Tewksbury began to grow, with hamlets springing up around industries or churches. In the late 1740s, we had a sawmill on what is the present Life Camp on McCann Mill Road. The Life Camp is a camp for underprivileged children in Newark, New Jersey, that come out here for the summer, learn how to swim, learn how to adapt to country life. It's all a nonprofit organization, and that existed and has existed for close to 100 years. In the 1750s, Hugh McCann was located there with a sawmill, a fulling and a dyeing mill, and a grist mill, with the place being called Alamantunk. And just above him on the river was Christopher Beekman's Forge. And in the 1760s, there were many people living at Beekman's Forge, Lamerton Forge, Lamington Forge, Tewksbury spelled with a X instead of a KS. And a mile off from Beekman's Forge is another village called Pottersville, which also is still in existence today. And leading into that, William Willett lived there as early as 1754. He was listed as living there at Lamatonk, which is an Indian name for the Lamington river. And in 1782, it showed that without moving, he was at the falls of Lamerton. So names changed quite frequently, or the deciphering of names. The Potter family then came to own most of the land and mills, and the area was named Potter's Mills. A post office came into being in 1829, and an 1850 map of Hunterdon shows Potter's Falls being called Lamington Falls, Lamington being the Lamington River. An 1852 map of Hunterdon shows Pottersville as a village and Potter's Falls north of the village. We have some other hamlets in Tewksbury: Fox Hill, Parkersville, and Fairmount. Again, by this point, the German influx began to initiate. By 1757, a German Reformed congregation of Fox Hill had moved from Morris County, that's the county just to the north of us, to the northern edge of Tewksbury. In 1817, it was incorporated as the First Presbyterian Church of Parker's Village on Fox Hill. And then the Methodists of Fairmount, upon their organization in 1837, did so under the name of the Parkersville Methodist Episcopal Church. We had Fairplain Academy. That was the name taken by the trustees that built the stone school in 1835. And again, an arrival of the post office changed the name to Fairmount in 1849. 20 years later, the Presbyterians substituted the name Fairmount for Fox Hill in the name of their church. And it was very prevalent here when post offices sprouted up in every little hamlet and village that they ended up dictating what the name of that village was, whether the postmaster shortened it. Sometimes people had trouble spelling names, and so they spelt it the way it sounded, which might not have been the original spelling. And so, we took our cues from the post office. We have an area called Hell Mountain, and there were two variations on this name. It was the home of rogues and highwaymen, and the earliest reference found was from 1764. Hell is German for clear or brilliant, and since the views from any direction were clear and brilliant, so hence the name. And this is a postcard back from the 1890s. And if you notice on the bottom, it's spelled Hill, Hill, because there was quite a concern about printing or having in print the word hell. And so they purposefully misspelled it, Hill, so as not to run afoul of using the word hell. And it says Mountainville, New Jersey, because that's the Mountainville side of Hell Mountain. Another village that we have called Tewksbury. The name was taken upon the incorporation of the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1814. And in August of 1815, the church was ready for services. It was formed by melding the names of America's first two Methodist bishops, Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury. It had been used in 1785 as the name of the short-lived seminary in Baltimore, Maryland. And Mindert Farley, a German immigrant, became the owner of 200 acres in 1779, long before Tewksbury existed. Again, the post office was named Cokesburg from 1848 till its discontinuance in 1867. However, it was a mistake, which was corrected when the postal service resumed in 1883. So again, the postmaster shortened the name unfortunately by not being able to spell correctly from Cokesburg to Cokesbury. We had another town originally called California that was shortened to Califon. This is its own incorporated borough that is right next to us. It first appeared on the map in 1860. The village formed in 1850 around the mill built by a Jacob neighbor with the proceeds from a successful prospecting venture with the 49ers, hence the name. It was shortened to Califon in the summer of 1876, again, most likely due to the application submittal for a post office. There were multiple businesses, including 2 stores, a hotel, 2 grist mills, 2 sawmills, 2 blacksmith shops, 2 wheelwright shops, 2 shoe shops, a harness shop, a distillery, a depot, and about 31 dwellings. And the little history, people maybe remember the name Merv Griffin. Merv Griffin owned property here in Califon, New Jersey for a short time back in the 1970s. And if you see any shows today as reruns, if you look on his, at the end, it says his production company is called Califon Productions. Well, that was named after this town or today borough where he lived for a very short stint of time. Mountainville, the Mountainville Academy, that was constructed in 1832. It gave Mountainville its name, although many kept referring to it as Bull's Head, the name of the tavern run by Jonathan Potter. It was situated at the confluence of 4 mountain streams. In 1803, a Joseph Sargent acquired 15 acres of riverfront property and established a sawmill, and this was the only non-agricultural business there for many years. The boom period for them began prior to the mid-1800s, and Daniel Potter moved his Bull's Head Tavern from his farm to a home in the village. Another small area, again, I'd refer to it as a hamlet, was originally called Vanoy and then rewritten or spelled to say Vernoy, but it was originally named after this Mrs. Vanoy, who had a limestone quarry north of California, later Califon, in 1868. The first station above Califon on the High Bridge branch of the New Jersey Central Railroad was located in Vanoy to handle limestone from her quarry, thus putting the place on the map as Vernoy or Vernoy Station. Another one, Apker's Corner, later became Bissell. A PR Apker and a JS Apker maintained a blacksmith shop here for many years. In 1876, the school district 66 was known as the Mount Pleasant or Apgar's Corner District. And again, here's another example. The post office came in 1893, bringing with it the name of the then U.S. Postmaster General Wilson S. Bissell. So they decided to rename their hamlet, which again still exists today as a confluence of probably half a dozen houses, and they decided to name it after the Postmaster General. Some early taverns. The first hotel was at New Germantown, located on the ground level of what was known as the Spec Store, which is today our Oldwick General Store. There was an earlier building on the site in prior to 1788. We had another hotel, was at Cokesburg, built in 1821 and kept by John Farley. A Mountainville Hotel came in around 1859, opened by Richard Hoffman, but it had been built by Daniel Potter. The Califon Hotel, built in 1860 by Jacob Apker, and then a hotel in Fairmount existed from 1838 to approximately 1842-43 at what was known as the distillery. So, you know, even today we think about a hotel and having a bar or restaurant inside it. Even back then, they put the hotel next to the distillery. Some of our early physicians, so I referenced early Dr. Oliver Barnett. He was the first physician. He came to New Germantown from Orange, New Jersey in 1765 at the age of 22. He acquired what was the Tunis Mealick farm east of the village on Bleetown Road that still exists today, and named the house after himself, Barnett Hall. He died in 1809 at the age of 66. Isaac Ogden, Mr. Barnett's brother-in-law, was a graduate of the College of New Jersey in 1784. Back then we know that was, today it's known as Princeton University, separate from the College of New Jersey, which exists, which was Trenton State College. He came to the village in 1800. He took charge of Dr. Barnett's estate upon his death, managing it for his sister, and relinquished the practice to his nephew. And then Dr. John Honeyman became a successor to Oliver Ogden. And then we had Dr. John Linneberry. He was the first physician at Mountainville. Some of the first mills, again, Ralph Smith being that primary landowner and naming the village Smithfield after himself. That was built before 1762 on what was earlier known as the Peter Mealick Farm, later became that Tunis Mealick Farm on Bleetown Road, that later being owned, as I referenced earlier, by Dr. Barnett. There were mills on the Rockaway. The Rockaway Creek is a major waterway that runs through Tewksbury. It has its origins here and eventually flows into the Raritan River, which flows into the Raritan Bay and finally into the Atlantic Ocean. There were mills on the Rockaway owned by John Lane. That was built in the mid-1700s, called Thompson's Mills, later became Johnson's Mills. And we had an Aaron Sutton built a mill in Califon on the Lebanon side of the river. So if you can sense the theme about mills and the significant water power that we had here in Tewksbury back in the late 1700s and early 1800s, which was needed to operate these mills. And we had a confluence of 5 different streams that came together, and these millers, the operators of the mills, were able to harness this water power to process a lot of the crops that were grown here, because Tewksbury was and still is in part today an agricultural community, and then getting that grain and feed and corn, etc., to larger areas, not even to New York City, but what we have is more urban areas here today in New Jersey, to Plainfield, to Elizabeth, to Newark. I'm sure you heard of some of those places. So those were, but they were a day or two travel, certainly by horseback, versus a 30-minute drive to or 40-minute drive to the city of Newark, and where Newark Airport is, Newark Liberty Airport. So just imagine, what they went through back then to get their product to someone else. Some of the earliest roads from New Germantown to Fox Hill was a half-mile east of what is the present Turnpike, and what was one of the first roads that we had. The earliest on record from Fox Hill to Hugh McCann's mill and down to the river to the fording place. These were quotes taken out of some of the records that I have. That goes back to June 23rd, 1756. A road was relayed from Ralph Smith's mill to the Alamatunk Bridge, February 15th, 1762. In 1811, the New Germantown Turnpike Company was chartered and organized, and it lasted as a toll road for 12 to 15 years before being turned over to the township to manage and maintain. First street was called Smith's Lane, running east-west through the village. Again, Smithfield, Ralph Smith, so there's Smith's Lane. It was known later as Potterstown Road, and then in a survey from 1755 called King Street. And King Street was named aptly because of it being at one point part of the King's Road, and it's a very wide road today, and more so than your average road. And so, as if a king was coming down it to be wide for enough room to travel, enough room to pass. And then another later survey in 1818 had it called Church Street. So churches, we had at 1.5 churches here in Tewksbury. We have 4 today. The Zion Lutheran, the preaching occurred as early as 1745 in New Germantown. Although the Lutheran congregation goes back to 1714, the Reverend Henry Melchior Muhlenberg visited and preached here. So we have here in Oldwick the oldest Zion Lutheran church still with an active Sunday service in the entire state of New Jersey. And I'm told in the Lutheran history, it's the second oldest still active church in the entire United States. And I don't know, I keep forgetting to ask where the oldest one is in the United States, but we're the second oldest here in Tewksbury, New Jersey. The Methodist Episcopal of New Germantown, so a Methodist missionary, came to town in 1782, being hosted by Tunis Mielik. Tunis Mielik, you heard me talk about earlier, was another large landowner. That family is 11 generations here in Tewksbury, so longer than mine. And is still active today in farming and agriculture. This missionary was hosted by Tunis Mielik, a church warden, where after several squabble services were held in the homes of sympathizers. So there was a lot of rancor, if you will, between a break-off from the Lutherans to the Methodist Episcopals. Unfortunately, this church, while the church building exists today, it no longer is a functioning active church because of the drop in attendees and drop in members, and it was actually a sad thing. So they got probably about 12 to 15 years ago, a Sunday service brought out maybe 6 people. My mother was one of them. She was a Methodist. The Apgars were Methodists. And so the church hierarchy made the decision to no longer have it be a church. So they go through what's called a deconsecration ceremony, where the pastor of the church goes through and removes all the religious implements, symbols, the cross, etc., from the altar, and basically during this service takes all that down off the walls, etc. And the sad thing I mentioned is that deconsecration service, which no one had ever witnessed or attended, certainly here, was standing room only in the church itself. That it was done on a Sunday afternoon. And so it was quite ironic that they couldn't get 6 people to come out to a church service, but when they ended the church itself, it brought standing room only to the sanctuary. We've got the Fairmount Presbyterian Church, or what was called the Fox Hill Church, one of the oldest in the region before 1746. There was a church building there, an old log house, on what was known as the Katie Sutton Farm. And there was a Michael Schlatter that was the preacher. A new building was erected prior to 1760 called Foxenberg from John Fox, a large landowner, later called Parkersville or Parker's Village from James Parker. You can see how everybody liked to name everything after themselves. In 1816, the building was torn down. A new one of stone was erected at a cost of $2,850. The church was legally incorporated in 1817. Later, this building was demolished, and yet another one was built in 1851 at a cost of $3,800. It being dedicated on July 25th, 1852. The name was changed to the First Presbyterian Church of Fairmount in 1869, actually by an act of the New Jersey legislature. That church is still in existence today. It still has an active service. And originally the church was a German Reformed, although the services held there prior to 1768 were actually conducted by the Reverend Mr. Graff from the Zion Lutheran Church. And there were several transfers that occurred thereafter. We have a Methodist Episcopal Church in Fairmount that was built in 1837. From 1800 till that time, preaching was done in a circuit with multiple pastors in private homes. Each place had a service once every 6 Sundays. The building, which is still in place and in use, is 45 by 80. The spire is 132 feet high. It has a seating capacity of 600, and it was built at a cost of $13,000. Presbyterian Church of Pottersville was located in Somerset County, but the parsonage was actually located is located in Hunterdon County and was begun in 1865. The cornerstone was laid May 22nd, 1866, with the dedication held December 26th, 1866. This church is 44 by 62 feet, the spire 122 and a half feet high. The cost was $8,264.58, with the furnishings an extra $2,881, so it cost $10,000. In those days, significant amount of money. And then we had the Tewksbury Presbyterian Church. Cornerstone was laid October 4th, 1880. It later diminished attendance, and fighting led to the dissolving of the church. So again, this was actually another church that the church building today is a private home, but no longer, is in existence in terms of a service. And there was also reference at the time to an old Methodist Episcopal church at Tewksbury, but it was, quote, not in the township. We have the oldest cemetery here in Tewksbury. It's the Lutheran at New Germantown. The oldest headstone is that of Charity Pickle. And from a dating perspective, again, we're talking about late 1600s, around 1688 to 1690. So switching gears a little bit and looking at our agriculture and our landscape, this is actually a more or less a pictorial of kind of a then and now, just to give you a perspective. So again, this is another one of the old roads, Fleetown Road, And you can kind of see off in the distance, if you can see my cursor, and what I'm circling here would be what was then Smithfield to New Germantown. Again, this is the 1880s photo. A different vantage point coming in from a different direction, but again, off here in the distance where my cursor is, again, the village of New Germantown, or what is today Oldwick. Again, many of these photos are 1880s to 1900s, 1910. This was just a postcard of the Lane farm. I talked about Peter Lane earlier, and they his sister, I believe, sent this to him, E.K.L. Edith Lane, and she just wrote on it, "There's no place like home." Back in those days, the typical the way people corresponded was just by a simple postcard, and they have these photos made up of their properties or homes. This one's a little bit hard to see, but it's a view of town, and reference to town would be New Germantown from the east. Again, you can imagine these are old original black and white postcards. This actually was my family's farm. Does not exist today. Would have been a time of my great grandfather, Benjamin Van Doren. I own the original farmhouse that was part of the farm. So the farmhouse is still here, built in 1790, but the farm complex itself does not exist. But this was just a picture from, again, roughly around 1900, 1910, somewhere's in there. I'll call it a more recent photo. Again, New Germantown. But again, I believe it was taken after the name changed, but they didn't change the name on the card, only based on some of the visuals of the buildings that are there. So this is probably the 1920s, 1930s. Again, New Germantown changed to Oldwick at 1919. And again, just from a vantage point, so here you can see here where my cursor is, that is the former Methodist church. Again, the church still exists today, still looks like a church, but is a antique store today. And this in here, this structure and all this open land in here, what was my family's farm. My father, grandfather, great grandfather, going back several generations. Again, we're all peach and fruit farmers. Different view from the west side of the village. Again, the back of the Methodist church is right here to the far right. This small stone house here still exists. It is the oldest structure, private structure in Oldwick today. Again, approximately 1670s in terms of when it was built. Another view of that same, just a little bit higher vantage point, but again, you can see all the orchards on the left and the right. Again, as I talked earlier about surrounding the village, that old stone house is here. Again, the former Methodist church. Now we can see the steeple of the Lutheran church right here above the stone house. Again, just another vantage point. Again, the open fields and surroundings, and again, the Methodist church. This is an older photo. If I go back one, and it's hard to see there that and it's hard to see here, but the steeple on the Methodist church steeples notoriously were magnets for lightning, and they didn't have grounding capability, and so many of our churches lost their spire steeples from lightning strikes and fire as a result of the lightning strike, or in the blizzard of 1888, physically blew off the steeples off the churches. And so then the churches themselves with carpenters, built new steeples, but built lower lower structures in height. Another area called Round Top, not too far from where we are here in New Germantown. They wrote New Germantown on the bottom of the card. Again, this is in the early 1900s, 19 teens. Again, it's all developed today, so it looks nothing like what it is here with open pasture and farmland. And this top is all covered with with housing development that came in the 1980s. This is kind of in the center of Tewksbury. It's what we call Burrell Road. It was named after the Burrell family. And there was a winery here. We had one winery up until the early 1990s called the Tewksbury Winery, Tewksbury Wine Cellars. The owner was a veterinarian. He decided he wanted to get into the winemaking business. Unfortunately, all this was covered in vineyards. But it didn't take off. It did not win award. He tried to do fruit flavored wines, the apple, the cherry, things like that. We actually have one bottle of each unopened in our archives that he gave us before leaving Tewksbury. He lives in Florida today. But the other interesting history about this is the grandson of Matisse, the artist, would summer here in Tewksbury, and stayed at what was then, well, it wasn't the winery then, but the house and the complex that are still there today were there at that time. And so it was always a little bit of history that we uncover as we're doing our research. This is the Richard Craig homestead. Again, the Craig family was another prominent family here. And actually I'm related on my father's side to the Craigs. This farm complex still exists today, still somewhat of an active farm. Back then it was a horse farm. Tewksbury here today is quite a large equestrian hobby, and we've produced a lot of Olympic riders and jumpers that have participated in past Olympics. Nona Garson being one. We have the United States Equestrian Team headquarters as part of the Olympics, based here in Tewksbury and adjacent Bedminster. And so today, what's helped keep Tewksbury somewhat rural is that the sheer amount of horses, and there's probably as many horses here as there are people. Our population here in Tewksbury, it'll be interesting to see what the new census numbers tell us. But as of the 2010 census, we had 6,700 people. We are 31 square miles, so we are quite spread out as a, and we're not considered probably rural anymore. We're considered somewhat suburban when you look at things. Again, that's that home. This was in the 1970s, this photo, in terms of, the architecture and how people have, maintained their properties and maintained their homes. And the great granddaughter of the original owner is still in this house today. This is an old lime kiln from the early 1800s. Lime was manufactured here that the farmers developed, and basically you dropped your material up at the top of this, behind this, and you had a fire in here. You can see he's stoking the fire. You've got the wood, and then the burnt material, which turned into lime, came down through this chute. These were quite intricately built. We have a handful that we've preserved that are usually along roadsides that end up becoming battering rams with cars and end up not surviving. So they've got protection around them in terms of guardrails and things like that, but just a little part of our history. And it's just fascinating the way when you look at the construction of these as to how they were built. They were, clearly engineered, although we don't have any design drawings on them, but, they've lasted for 150 to almost 200 years. I just threw this old photo in here, some family members of mine. This is coming up to the 1950s. We used to have a street dance at once a year. They close the street, and as a benefit for the Tewksbury Public Library, would raise money and alternate by having every half hour square dancing and rock and roll dancing in the street. Everybody would decorate their house. You'd pay $5 to get in, and it was a ritual of summer leading into summer, and it lasted up through the late 1980s. So it lasted for about 40 years before too much traffic caused issues with trying to continue to close the road. And so everybody would gather at Mary's Sweet Shop, and there's a couple of my uncles here, my mother's brothers. One, this gentleman here, George, on the far left, and actually just turned 92 last week. And another one of her brothers, my mother's brothers here, Glenn, on the far right. And that is a bit of history of Tewksbury.
Great, Shaun. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. You packed a lot into 50 minutes. That was great. I think certainly one of the things I'm going to take away is that you have more horses than you do people. That's that's something that's memorable. But so at this point, I'll turn it over to the audience. If anyone has any questions or comments, they can type them into the chat, and I will relay those to Shaun. And we'll maybe go for another 5 minutes or so. Jessica would like to know, what is your town mascot?
Well, unofficially, it would probably be the horse. There isn't any official one. The seal, the Tewksbury seal, is a picture of a farm field with a wheat chaff, in the center of it. That there was a contest back in the 1950s, and actually the then mayor's daughter, which some said might have been rigged. His daughter won the contest for the seal, and so that probably comes closest to mascot.
And Shaun, before we went live, you had mentioned to me that, unless I misunderstood, that you at one point were mayor of Tewksbury.
I was.
Yeah. Can you talk about the government structure of Tewksbury, how that all works?
Sure. So we have what's called we call it a township committee. It's akin to a town council. It's governed by a five-person governing body. All 5 members are elected at large for 3-year terms. It's political. In other words, we have a primary, so you're either running as a Republican, running as a Democrat, running as an independent, and then go through a general election. And then the 5 individuals choose who the mayor serves, who the mayor becomes, and you serve a 1-year term as mayor. So we don't have a directly elected mayor here. And so the mayor only has authority that's vested in them by the rest of the governing body. I mean, I served 21 years on the township committee running 3-year terms, and I served 3 1-year terms as mayor. I'd say probably the nicest part of being mayor was you got to marry people. And that authority remains with me, even past being a mayor. That the legislature changed the law to allow former mayors to continue to marry people. And I mean, the unfortunate part of my serving was I served as mayor in 2001. And that was, of course, when we had 9/11, which we're coming up on 20 years next year. And so we did lose one resident from Tewksbury here who was in the World Trade Center that day. I did not know him, but the residents in Pottersville, one of those villages I covered in my talk, he lived there. They held a candlelight vigil. So it was, and they wanted various people to speak, and I was not comfortable at the time speaking. I didn't want it to be seen as being political. And so I opted not to speak, and I just, was there, and it was a very moving time. But it's, it's New Jersey, unfortunately, has a myriad of government, of types of government. Directly elected mayors, appointed mayors. You have strong mayor, weak council, strong council, weak mayor. It's all vested, in the legislative process. If you've heard the term home rule, it's what the New Jersey legislature going back 200 years vested lots of control in localities here and in municipalities. So the municipality here, Tewksbury, we get to control our land use and governance and things like that, versus maybe other states where county government is the, lowest level of government, or the government that runs, more things, as I can think of, maybe Connecticut having a county government type structure.
Well, that's I did just hear one unfortunate parallel that Tewksbury, Massachusetts has with Tewksbury, New Jersey, is we lost two residents on September 11th. So that's unfortunate there.
Mm-hmm.
Elaine would like to know about your school system. Does Tewksbury itself have any schools, or do you share schools with other communities around you?
We do. We have a kindergarten through third grade school, and then we have a fourth through eighth that are ours. Back in the time during all this, the time period from the presentation, each of those villages that I covered back then, each had their own one-room school. And in the 1950s, the state did step in and wanted all these one-room schools to go away, just from the type of maintenance and management of them. So schools began to what was called a regionalize at that point. So that's when we had a new school built that maybe closed 8 or 9 individual schools to one. And then our high school students, 9 through 12, we then have a regionalized 12 municipality school districts, split 6 and 6. 6 towns go to one high school and 6 towns go to another. And so our taxes are apportioned based on a formula for supporting both the local Tewksbury schools and the regional high school.
Okay, and as we approach 3:30, one last question, unless another one appears quickly. Someone is wondering if so Tewksbury, Massachusetts, one of the things we're most known for is the state hospital that we have, actually built, I think, in the 1850s, I want to say. Just wondering if Tewksbury has any sort of hospital or medical facility in it or nearby it.
No, we do not. We have a county. We have a regional medical center in our county seat called Hunterdon Medical Center, for which the county sits in. That would be the closest medical facility. There are other than hospitals a bit farther away in other counties. Morristown Memorial Hospital in Morris County, Somerset Medical Center. So, I mean, they're within a 20 to 30 minute drive, but no medical facility in Tewksbury itself.
And actually, one more question just sent to me. Who is Tewksbury, New Jersey's most famous resident? You referenced Merv Griffin owning property. Not sure if you'd consider him a resident or not, but sort of old time. Any famous folks live in Tewksbury?
There are the actor John Amos from Good Times back in the 70s and Roots. He lives here. And he's actually getting an award. It may be tonight or it's next weekend. He's being inducted into our New Jersey Hall of Fame, which I think is a virtual ceremony because of COVID. Christine Todd Whitman, she was our first woman governor of New Jersey and the 50th governor of New Jersey. She lives here. Her family lived here. She's still here today. I'm trying to think that we've had several first ladies, former first ladies of the United States, visit here. Eleanor Roosevelt, my father actually saw in a car. Her car and driver pulled up to our house back in the 1950s, I would say, maybe early 60s. Actually lost. The driver was looking for directions, and he recognized Mrs. Roosevelt sitting in the back seat. Jacqueline Kennedy, Jackie Onassis, moved out to this area after JFK's assassination. Lived on a farm, not in Tewksbury, but in an adjacent municipality. But I actually got to meet her, and during my teenage years, there's a gift shop across the street from my house. I worked there for many years, and I got to help her, wait on her in terms of purchasing items. So probably a few famous people here.
Yeah, great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and we have hit 3:30.
Okay.
So, Shaun, are there any last words you want to leave with the group?
Again, I just thank you for the opportunity to present today. And if people have further questions or want further information, happy to provide that via email. And help however I can. If there's any history requests or genealogy requests, I do work closely with our Tewksbury librarian here, and so if you go through her, she'll get to me if you don't come directly to me.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Shaun, for spending an hour with us this afternoon. I really learned a lot, greatly appreciate it. I want to thank everyone who joined us live on Zoom and on Facebook, and I thank everyone who watches after the fact on YouTube. So again, thank you all for joining us here today, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend. Thanks so much, Shaun. I'll follow up with you via email tomorrow. And again, thank you all. Look for that email tomorrow morning with the feedback survey. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could fill that out. So thanks again. Have a good day. Thank you, Shaun.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.